Across the sun-scorched deserts of Arizona, there are roads that stretch for miles with nothing but sand, rocks, and the blazing sun for company. During the day, the highways seem endless and barren. At night, they are dangerous in more ways than one. Drivers report headlights catching figures that vanish instantly. Shadows stretch across the asphalt even when no one else is on the road. Wind carries voices, cries, and whispers across dunes and dry riverbeds. These desert border roads were built for travel, trade, and transport, but over time they have become silent witnesses to countless tragedies. Travelers who lost their way, travelers who vanished in the heat, and travelers whose vehicles broke down in the dead of night never returned. Locals say some of these roads remember. They absorb fear, despair, and loss. And when night falls, they sometimes reveal it. Tonight, we travel along the 20 most haunted desert border roads in Arizona, where isolation meets history, and the horizon hides more than just dust and rocks. If you were driving alone along a deserted stretch at midnight and saw a figure standing in the middle of the road, unmoving and staring at you, would you stop to see who it was, or would you press the gas and hope you reach the next town before it moves? Hello, my dear friend. I hope you are safe and somewhere comfortable, because the roads we are about to travel are long, isolated, and steeped in stories no one dares to tell. Arizona's deserts are unforgiving. Heat during the day, freezing nights, sudden sandstorms, and endless stretches of asphalt make travelers vulnerable. Many who ventured into these desert roads never made it to their destination. Over the decades, countless travelers have disappeared. Some were never found. Others were discovered days later, far from their vehicles, with no explanation. Locals whisper that the roads themselves hold memories. They remember fear, isolation, and desperation. Visitors today report strange phenomena. Faint footsteps echoing in the sand. Car engines that sputter without reason. Figures standing alongside or on the road that vanish before the vehicle reaches them. Glowing lights that appear in the distance but fade as drivers approach. Some roads are heavily traveled. Others are remote, barely maintained. Yet the stories of haunting span all of them. Before we take these roads together, let me ask you something. If you were driving along an empty desert road at night and heard someone whisper your name from the darkness just ahead, would you stop to investigate, or would you drive past as fast as possible, praying you were alone? Take a deep breath. And let us begin our journey along the 20 most haunted desert border roads in Arizona. Red Dune Highway stretches endlessly through vast expanses of sand, the dunes rising and falling like waves frozen in time. The road cuts a straight line through the desert, flanked on both sides by red-tinted sand that shifts with the wind. The heat of day warms the asphalt, creating waves of shimmer that blur the edges of the dunes. At night, the landscape transforms into a muted, shadowed expanse where shapes merge with darkness, and the horizon seems to stretch beyond perception. The highway feels isolated, a ribbon of human passage through a land that is both vast and untamed. Drivers traversing the road often report unusual experiences. Shadowy figures appear on the dunes, moving slowly across the sand. Their forms are indistinct, blending with the natural curves of the landscape. When headlights sweep over them, the figures vanish instantly, leaving no footprints or disturbance in the sand. Observers describe a fleeting awareness, a sense that something has been seen but cannot be grasped. The shapes reappear unpredictably, always just out of reach, maintaining a presence that is both subtle and persistent. Soft cries sometimes accompany these sightings. The sound drifts through the wind, carried across the dunes in a low, mournful tone. It is never sustained, rising and fading unpredictably, leaving the listener unsure whether it is human, animal, or something else entirely. The cries seem to echo in the emptiness, bouncing off the slopes of the dunes and along the edges of the highway. They draw attention, causing drivers to slow or stop, listening intently to the desert night. The sound appears from different directions, sometimes behind, sometimes ahead, always transient, impossible to trace to a source. The topography of the dunes enhances the experience. Peaks and valleys distort sound and shadow, creating visual and auditory illusions that play with perception. A dip in the sand can conceal the approach of a figure. And the curve of a ridge can carry a cry farther than expected. Headlights illuminate only part of the landscape at a time, leaving the rest cloaked in darkness. The combination of natural forms, shifting light, and human perception creates an immersive environment in which the ordinary rules of space and distance feel altered. Many travelers describe a sense of being observed. The shadowy figures never approach, never acknowledge the living, yet their presence is tangible. The dunes themselves seem to hold memory, each slope and crest imbued with the weight of time and human activity. The wind carries the cries, sometimes clearly, sometimes faintly, as though the desert itself is repeating something long past. Even when no figure is visible, the impression of movement persists, a subtle awareness of something just beyond sight. Historical context adds depth to these experiences. The region has been traversed by travelers, traders, and settlers for generations. Sand and wind have shifted constantly, reshaping the landscape, but human passage leaves lasting impressions in memory and lore. Stories passed down through locals speak of travelers encountering ghostly figures on dunes, hearing voices carried by the wind, and feeling compelled to pause along stretches of the highway. These accounts align with modern reports, suggesting that the land holds an enduring presence, a subtle echo of those who moved through it before. The emotional impact on drivers and isolation of the highway, combined with the vast, open desert and the unpredictable appearances of figures and sound, produces heightened attention. Heart rates increase, senses sharpen, and perception becomes intensely focused. Observers report moments of unease, tempered by curiosity, as the desert asserts its scale and mystery. The experience is immersive, blending visual, auditory, and emotional responses into a coherent sense of place. At night, the Red Dune Highway feels otherworldly. Headlights cut narrow paths of illumination, casting long shadows across sand and rock. Figures may appear at the edge of light, moving slowly and deliberately before vanishing. The cries continue to drift across the dunes, layered with the sound of wind. Even experienced travelers report disorientation, a sense that time and distance have shifted, that the landscape is larger and more expansive than maps or memory suggest. Despite the unsettling elements, the highway remains physically safe. The phenomena are largely perceptual, subtle, and transient. Observers are not threatened, though the experiences are intense and memorable. They encourage careful attention to surroundings, a slower pace, and mindfulness of the environment. The road, sand, and wind interact to create a unique form of storytelling, in which the land itself seems to communicate with those who traverse it. By dawn, the dunes return to quiet. The shadows shorten, the wind softens, and the cries vanish. Figures no longer appear, leaving the desert seemingly empty. Yet the impressions linger in memory. The fleeting silhouettes, the transient voices, and the shifting shadows across the sand. And the isolation, the scale of the landscape, and the subtle presence that made the highway feel alive. Red Dune Highway endures as a place of natural beauty, history, and subtle mystery. Long stretches of sand, shifting light, and the interplay of wind and perception create an environment that is both familiar and uncanny. Visitors experience not only the physical landscape but the layered presence of those who came before, the memory of human passage, and the enduring echoes of the desert itself. The highway is a corridor through space, time, and perception, where shadows walk, voices drift, and the dunes hold stories that vanish as quickly as they appear, leaving only memory behind. Saguaro Pass Road stretches through the desert, a narrow ribbon of asphalt flanked by towering saguaros that rise like silent sentinels against the sky. By day, the cacti cast long, spindly shadows across the terrain, their ribbed surfaces catching light and creating intricate patterns on sand and rock. The landscape is stark and arid, yet beautiful in its rhythm, a mixture of muted colors and sculpted forms shaped by centuries of wind and sun. The road is quiet during daylight. Occasional vehicles pass, and birds circle overhead, their calls echoing across the open desert. The saguaros appear still and unmoving, guardians of the terrain, their presence imposing yet familiar. Travelers feel the scale of the desert, the distance between each ridge and valley, and the quiet persistence of life in a harsh environment. As night falls, the pass transforms. Shadows stretch across the road, blending with the silhouettes of the cacti. The moon casts pale light, illuminating their spines while leaving hollows and gullies in near-complete darkness. The landscape becomes harder to read. It is during these hours that unusual lights are reported. Small glimmers move between the saguaros, bright enough to draw attention yet dim and fleeting. They weave along the road and among the cacti, sometimes rising, sometimes dipping toward the ground. No vehicle approaches. Figures are occasionally seen along the roadside. They behave independently, moving in ways that seem deliberate yet entirely unbound by known paths or obstacles. Observers note that the lights pause as if acknowledging presence, then continue, vanishing into darkness when approached. They stand silently, often half hidden by the cacti or the undulating terrain. Their posture is still, upright, and unmistakably human in shape. Travelers describe an urge to approach, curiosity tempered by unease. By the time one draws near, the figure has vanished completely, leaving only empty desert behind and the long shadows of the saguaros. No footprints mark the ground. No disturbance in sand or gravel remains. Wind moves through the pass, carrying scents of dry earth and faint desert flora. Sound travels oddly across the open terrain, every creak of asphalt and brush of wind magnified. Observers feel as though the pass itself is attentive, aware of movement, echoing presence, and intention. Travelers often describe a mixture of fear and fascination. The desert is imposing by itself, yet the combination of moving lights, vanishing figures, and echoes of presence heighten awareness. Each shadow, each glimmer, each sound is perceived as a potential encounter. The mind sharpens, noting details that might be overlooked during the day. Every step is deliberate, every glance cautious, as the pass appears both alive and inscrutable. Local accounts suggest the phenomena have existed for decades. Residents describe seeing lights moving between cacti during late-night travel long before modern roadways existed. Figures have been glimpsed standing near the roadside, always retreating into darkness when observed. These stories persist despite the construction of streetlights and modern observation, reinforcing the Pasa's reputation as a place of mystery and subtle danger. Tall and closely spaced in sections, the saguaros obscure sightlines, creating shadows and pockets where forms may appear and vanish. Their uniformity, coupled with the play of moonlight, amplifies illusions, making stationary objects appear to move. Observers report that the larger the cluster, the more likely it is to perceive figures emerging or lights moving between the trunks. Desert nights are often cool, and sudden gusts move branches, tumble small stones, and stir dust along the road. These environmental changes combine with shadows and light to create a dynamic space where visual and auditory perception feels unreliable. Hikers and drivers alike report a heightened awareness of subtle changes in terrain, light, and sound. Saguaro Pass Road teaches caution. The desert is hazardous. Loose gravel, uneven asphalt, and sudden drops in terrain require attention. The sensation of unseen presence reinforces careful movement. Travelers navigate slowly, watching for both natural hazards and the subtle signs of the lights and figures reported. The landscape demands respect, both for its physical challenges and for the perceptual experiences it evokes. Even after leaving the pass, impressions linger. Observers recall the fleeting lights, the shapes among the cacti, the echoes that seem to follow footsteps along the road. The memory of movement that vanishes upon approach leaves a lasting sense of mystery. Those who traverse the desert by night retain a heightened awareness of shadow, sound, and space, understanding that Saguaro Pass Road is a landscape of both natural beauty and elusive phenomena. The pass endures as a place of interaction between observer and environment. Its cacti rise like guardians, the terrain channels sound and light, and the desert preserves a space in which perception is amplified. Lights move, figures appear, and the desert responds subtly to the presence of travelers. Every visit creates a unique experience, a combination of natural features and ephemeral events, ensuring that Saguaro Pass Road remains a place where the desert feels alive, mysterious, and unforgettable. Coyote Trail Border Road winds tightly through a series of rocky canyons, isolated and narrow, hugging cliffs and dropping abruptly into shallow ravines. The road is paved but worn, with cracks and loose stones along the edges, forcing drivers to pay close attention. Steep rock faces rise on either side, their surfaces jagged and shadowed. Light filters unevenly between canyon walls, creating alternating patches of brightness and darkness. The air carries the scent of dust, dry earth, and occasional vegetation clinging to cracks in stone. Travelers often notice a change in temperature as they approach certain curves. It is sudden, almost chilling. One moment the air feels normal, the next it drops several degrees. Windows fog slightly. Clothing stiffens against the cold. Drivers report that the sensation is localized, fading just as abruptly once the curve has been passed, leaving a lingering sense of unease. The effect is subtle but unmistakable, leaving a lingering sense of unease. The road amplifies sound. Narrow canyon walls reflect engine hums, tire movement, and voices in distorted echoes. In some areas, the sound of wind rushing through the cliffs mingles with unexpected noises. Drivers and passengers alike report hearing footsteps along the roadside, not matching their own pace, as if someone or something is moving parallel to the car. The steps are heavy and deliberate, sometimes in rhythm with the vehicle, other times independent, coming from just beyond the edge of sight. Howls are often reported in the same sections of the canyon. They resemble coyote or wolf calls at first, yet something about them feels off. The tone can fluctuate rapidly, descending into ranges no animal could produce. The sound travels in a way that seems targeted, drifting along the curves of the canyon rather than spreading uniformly. Some travelers say the howls follow the car, moving from one bend to the next, always just beyond clear view. Visual perception is affected as well. Shadows along the cliffs appear to move, elongate, or shift independently of sunlight or terrain. Rocks that are stable in daylight can seem subtly altered in shape at twilight. These forms are fleeting, and when focused upon, they vanish or blend into natural features of the canyon. Peripheral glimpses of figures are reported as silhouettes darting along ledges, too fast to track directly. These forms are fleeting, and when focused upon, they vanish or blend into natural features of the canyon. The combination of sound, temperature, and shadow creates a heightened sense of awareness. Drivers instinctively slow, adjust mirrors, and scan the edges of the road with greater intensity. Each curve feels more precarious. The mind registers environmental cues more sharply, perceiving movement and presence where ordinarily none exists. This hyper-awareness is intensified during evening or nighttime travel, when light is limited and shadows deepen along canyon walls. Historical context adds another layer to the experience. Coyote Trail Border Road follows older paths used by explorers, travelers, and settlers navigating rugged terrain. The narrow trails were once difficult for horses and wagons, and many travelers were forced to proceed with caution or turn back. Stories of individuals who vanished along these paths have circulated for decades, providing the road with a reputation for mystery and unexplained occurrences. Local lore suggests that the land preserves echoes of movement, footsteps, and sounds from the past. Natural explanations account for some phenomena. Wind through the canyon produces unusual echoes. Temperature drops occur when air is funneled through narrow passages or along shaded curves. Shadows shift as sunlight passes along uneven rock faces. Animals may be present but hidden from view. These factors interact in ways that can trick perception, particularly in low light or when attention is focused on expected hazards. Yet multiple reports suggest more than natural coincidence. Drivers across years and different conditions describe the same sequences. Cold air at precise curves, footsteps alongside vehicles, howls with unnatural range and tone. Fleeting shapes along cliffs, observers describe a pattern of perception that is consistent and reproducible, creating a compelling sense of presence despite the absence of physical evidence. Evening travel intensifies the experience. Dusk casts long shadows across the canyon floor. Wind increases slightly, carrying both dust and sound along the cliffs. The temperature drop is more pronounced, and the sensation of movement alongside the car becomes stronger. Figures in the peripheral vision appear sharper, climbing ledges or appearing momentarily along distant curves. The auditory landscape feels layered, engine hum, tires on gravel, wind, footsteps, and howls intertwine into a sequence that is immersive and continuous. Travelers who pause report an acute sense of stillness and observation. The road feels alive without visible life, with presence suggested by air, sound, and shadow. The mind becomes attuned to subtle variations, perceiving layers of movement and rhythm in the environment. Awareness remains heightened even after leaving the canyon, with echoes of steps, faint howls, and the sensation of cold brushing air persisting in memory. Coyote Trail Border Road continues to be accessible to drivers, hikers, and explorers. By day, it provides scenic views, rugged terrain, and geological interest. By night, or under changing weather and light, it reveals its layered character. Temperature shifts, echoes of footsteps, unexplained howls, and fleeting shadows. Visitors leave with a sense of connection to the road, an awareness of its history, and an impression that the landscape interacts with perception, creating experiences that are both compelling and unforgettable. The canyon walls, narrow curves, and rocky terrain preserve more than geography. They carry impression, memory, and perception. Footsteps, shadows, howls, and sudden chills converge to create a space where the natural world, human history, and individual awareness intersect. Travelers who navigate Coyote Trail Border Road experience a landscape that is both physically challenging and perceptually intricate. A place where caution, observation, and attentiveness reveal the depth and mystery of the environment. Desert Mirage Highway stretches across a barren landscape, where the asphalt seems to vanish into heat waves rising from the sand. During the day, the sun beats down relentlessly, creating shimmering ripples along the road. The horizon bends and wavers, making distant objects appear closer than they are. Travelers squint against the glare, unsure whether the shapes they see are real or born of the heat haze. The highway is long, isolated, and unforgiving, a place where perception is easily deceived. Vehicles traverse the asphalt carefully. Engines hum steadily, tires crunch lightly against gravel shoulders, and drivers focus on maintaining a straight course. The desert offers little guidance beyond distant hills and faint lines of the road. Movement is measured, deliberate, as if the landscape itself demands respect. Illusions appear frequently. At night, travelers report seeing vehicles parked along the roadside, headlights flickering in the distance, and people walking just beyond reach. Shapes shimmer and shift with the darkness, sometimes appearing as familiar forms of cars, trucks, or even pedestrians, but when approached, they vanish instantly, leaving nothing but empty desert. The illusions are unsettling. Travelers describe a moment of certainty followed by abrupt absence. Shapes solidify just long enough to suggest interaction and then disappear, as though they exist on a different layer of reality. The mind registers form, color, and motion, only for perception to reveal nothing. Whispers follow vehicles at night. Names are spoken softly, carried along with the wind. Warnings, sometimes cryptic, occasionally accompany the sound of passing tires. Observers describe the whispers as close enough to startle, yet elusive, fading if one attempts to trace the source. The effect is subtle, a mixture of auditory and psychological tension that heightens awareness along the desolate road. The highway amplifies perception. Flat expanses of sand allow light, shadow, and sound to travel long distances. Heat waves distort vision during the day, while cold night air carries sound in unpredictable ways. Drivers report that distant lights can appear stationary and then suddenly shift closer or vanish entirely. Observers feel a simultaneous sense of exposure and observation, as if the desert is both empty and aware. Historical accounts provide context. The route was once a path for travelers and traders, crossing desert flats where navigation was perilous and temperatures extreme. Vehicles could break down, travelers could become lost, and mirages were common. The effect is enhanced by shadows and the flicker of lights over heat waves or uneven terrain. These moments leave a lingering impression, even after the shapes vanish. The whispers carry weight. Names spoken are sometimes recognized, other times unfamiliar. Warnings vary in tone, some gentle, some urgent. Observers report increased heart rate, heightened attention, and a feeling that the road itself is conveying a message meant for them specifically. The desert remains silent visually, yet communicates audibly in a subtle, persistent way. Time seems altered along the highway. Minutes stretch and contract as drivers focus on distant mirages and shifting lights. The horizon appears closer, then further. Shadows lengthen unpredictably. Observers describe a tension between certainty and uncertainty, as if the highway is guiding perception while remaining elusive. Night intensifies the phenomena. Temperature drops, wind rises, and shadows deepen. Illusions of vehicles and figures become clearer in contrast with darkness. Headlights may appear suddenly on distant bends, only to vanish when approached. Whispers become more pronounced, carried by the open air, and echo slightly along the asphalt. Headlights may appear suddenly on distant bends, only to vanish when approached. Whispers become more pronounced, carried by the open air, and echo slightly along the asphalt. Drivers and observers describe the effect as immersive, disorienting, yet never overtly threatening. Daylight restores normal perception. Sunrise disperses illusions and whispers. Heat creates shimmering ripples rather than forms. Shadows retreat, and the landscape regains a predictable shape. Travelers note that certainty and orientation return, yet the memory of night experiences lingers. The highway endures. Desert Mirage Highway remains long, isolated, and capable of manipulating perception. Vehicles and figures appear and vanish, whispers rise and fade. And the desert preserves the sensation of movement, attention, and presence beyond immediate visibility. Travelers leave aware that the road itself retains memory. Observers depart carrying impressions. They recall shapes in distance, whispers that seem directed, and the sensation of being followed or watched. The desert stretches on, unchanged, while the mind retains a heightened awareness of isolation, perception, and the enduring presence of phenomena along Desert Mirage Highway. Black Rock Road winds through a narrow corridor of cliffs and dark stone outcroppings, rising and falling with the natural contours of the land. The road is lined with jagged formations that cast long, eerie shadows across the asphalt, especially as the sun lowers toward the horizon. Each curve reveals more rock faces and gullies, creating pockets of shadow where the eye struggles to discern depth. The landscape feels both imposing and intimate, guiding travelers along a path that has existed for centuries yet remains untamed. During the day, the road, sunlight glints off blackened stone, highlighting textures and patterns formed by erosion. The cliffs tower overhead, but the scale is reassuring rather than threatening. Wildlife moves quietly among the rocks, and the occasional stream crosses beneath the road, reflecting light and providing a subtle rhythm to the journey. Yet as evening approaches, the road changes. Shadows deepen rapidly, merging with rock and terrain until shapes appear unfamiliar. Figures in old clothing are occasionally seen walking along the edge, seemingly unaware of modern vehicles or travelers. They move slowly, heads bowed or gazing toward the cliffs, sometimes disappearing entirely when observed directly. The brief sighting leaves an impression of presence that feels both distant and immediate. Drivers report peculiar occurrences along specific stretches. Cars stall unexpectedly, often in the same spot repeatedly. Engines turn over but fail to respond, as if the vehicle encounters an invisible obstruction. Attempting to restart sometimes succeeds, yet the effect can recur on subsequent passes. The phenomenon does not appear mechanical in origin, nor does it affect multiple vehicles simultaneously. The consistent location of these stalls has led to caution among locals and travelers alike. The combination of visual and physical anomalies shapes perception along the road. Shadows from cliffs exaggerate angles, producing shapes that appear to move independently. Glimpses of figures at the roadside, combined with stalled vehicles and shifting light, create a layered experience in which reality and perception intertwine. Observers report an acute awareness of surroundings, noting every sound, every shift in light, and every detail of the asphalt beneath tires or shoes. The cliffs themselves add to the impression of observation. Observers report feeling as though unseen eyes follow movement along the road. This sensation is heightened by glimpses of figures in period clothing who appear briefly on ledges or behind outcroppings. Their posture, slow movement, and detachment from vehicles or passers-by reinforce the perception of lingering presence. The atmosphere is tense and foreboding. Sound behaves differently along Black Rock Road. Engine noises echo sharply against rock. Footsteps resonate unexpectedly, and the wind carries muted whispers along gullies and narrow stretches. Drivers often describe the sensation of approaching a curve, hearing sounds that suggest movement ahead or beside the vehicle, only to find the space empty. The auditory cues create tension and encourage heightened attention. Light plays a central role in shaping perception. During twilight, fading sunlight casts uneven patterns across cliffs and road surfaces, exaggerating angles and deepening shadows. Headlights illuminate rock faces in shifting arcs, creating temporary relief that quickly returns to darkness as curves and inclines alter the line of sight. The interplay of artificial and natural light transforms ordinary terrain into a space that feels both expansive and confining. Historical context adds to the experience. Black Rock Road has existed for generations. Once used by early settlers and travelers navigating challenging terrain. Reports of unusual sightings, vehicles stalling, and strange figures have persisted over decades, forming a subtle but persistent folklore. The road carries the weight of memory, layered over its geological features, influencing perception and expectation among those who traverse it. Travelers describe a rhythm to the road. As curves approach, shadows lengthen, figures may appear or vanish, and engine anomalies occur in isolated spots. This rhythm heightens focus and awareness, compelling careful navigation and attention to detail. Each step or mile is measured, not merely for safety, but in response to the layered sensory environment. This rhythm heightens focus and awareness, compelling careful navigation and attention to detail. Each step or mile is measured, not merely for safety, but in response to the layered sensory environment. Despite these experiences, Black Rock Road is not actively hostile. The phenomena are subtle, creating tension and uncertainty without threatening harm. The environment communicates indirectly, through impression rather than direct action. Drivers and hikers navigate successfully when they maintain caution, attention, and respect for the landscape. By nightfall, the road transforms completely. Shadows dominate, figures appear at intervals. And stalled vehicles become more frequent along notorious stretches. The wind carries distant, muted whispers across cliffs, reinforcing the sense of layered history. Movement along the road requires both care and attentiveness, as perception of the unseen becomes as important as observation of the physical path. At dawn, the road returns to apparent normalcy. Shadows shorten, figures vanish, and stalled vehicles function without issue. The landscape appears unchanged, yet the memory of the previous night persists with those who experienced it. Black Rock Road remains a place where perception, history, and environment intersect, producing experiences that are immersive, unsettling, and unforgettable. Travelers along this route learn to respect the cliffs, the shadows, and the unexpected. The combination of visual cues, auditory signals, and unusual vehicle behavior reinforces awareness, ensuring that each journey is measured carefully. Black Rock Road endures as a corridor of natural beauty and subtle mystery, where figures in old clothing, echoing footsteps, and stalled engines create a persistent sense that the road is alive with memory, observation, and presence, demanding attention from every passerby. Ghost Canyon Border Road winds through steep canyon edges, its asphalt carved along sheer drops and narrow ledges that rise and fall with the contours of the land. The canyon walls, layered with red and brown sediment, tower over the road, their jagged edges catching the light of the sun by day and fading into shadow by night. Twisting turns and sharp curves require careful navigation, each bend revealing new views of cliffs, valleys, and the river far below. The road seems isolated, a ribbon of travel suspended between the heights of the canyon and the depths of the gorge. During daylight, travelers see only the grandeur of the landscape. The road is quiet except for the hum of tires along asphalt. The wind carries the faint scent of earth and stone. Sunlight illuminates striations in the rock. And the wind carries the faint scent of earth and stone. Despite its steepness, the route feels safe in daylight, with the expanse of canyon revealing nothing threatening. Only rugged beauty and geological history carved over millions of years. As the sun dips toward evening, the road transforms. Shadows lengthen across the cliffs, twisting along the walls of the canyon and extending into the deep recesses below. Travelers report unusual phenomena at this time. Headlights, sweeping across the curves, sometimes catch figures standing on cliffs or narrow ledges. The shapes are dark and humanoid, silhouetted against the fading light. Yet when approached or observed directly, the figures vanish, leaving only rock and shadow in their place. They reappear unpredictably, always at the edge of perception, creating a sense of presence that is tangible but elusive. Alongside the visual phenomena, voices are heard drifting across the canyon. The echoes are faint at first, carried by wind and distance, yet unmistakably human. Some describe them as murmurs, others as brief calls or whispers. The sounds seem to emerge from multiple points along the cliffs, bouncing off rock faces and fading before a source can be located. They arrive unexpectedly, sometimes behind, sometimes ahead, drawing attention to the canyon's vastness and amplifying the sense of isolation. The geography of the canyon enhances these experiences. Echoes from one side of the canyon may reach the other, creating the impression of multiple sources. Shadows cast by cliffs, ledges, and rock outcroppings shift with the changing light, sometimes appearing to move. Combined, these effects produce a perception of activity, figures, and sound that challenges conventional understanding of the landscape. Travelers describe heightened awareness when these phenomena occur. A cold draft may sweep along the canyon edge, brushing against skin. And footsteps along the road seem more pronounced. Heartbeats quicken instinctively when headlights illuminate a figure that disappears upon closer approach. The canyon evokes a simultaneous sense of beauty and unease, compelling visitors to move cautiously, while observing every detail of the environment. Historical context provides insight into the area. Ghost Canyon Border Road traverses land long traveled by settlers, traders, and explorers. Indigenous peoples navigated the canyon for generations. Later travelers followed winding paths to trade or reach distant settlements. The steep terrain has historically been hazardous, with rockfalls and sudden weather changes posing dangers. These factors contribute to the lore of the area, with stories passed down about travelers glimpsing figures along the cliffs, or hearing voices carried on canyon winds. Despite the unsettling aspects, the road remains navigable. The phenomena are perceptual, subtle, and do not pose physical harm. They encourage attentiveness and reflection, blending the natural beauty of the canyon with a sense of history, memory, and mystery. Observers report that the combination of shadow, echo, and perception creates an immersive narrative of the land itself responding to those who travel it. Nightfall intensifies the canyon's character. Darkness envelopes the cliffs, reducing the landscape to shapes and faint textures. Headlights illuminate rock faces in isolated bands, revealing silhouettes that vanish when approached. The voices rise and fade unpredictably, echoing across the gorge and producing the impression of multiple presences. The experience creates a rhythm of tension and curiosity, engaging observers fully with the environment, where perception of sound and shadow is heightened by isolation and scale. Travelers often reflect on these experiences long after leaving. The memory of figures on cliffs, the sound of voices echoing without source, and the awareness of the canyon's vastness remain vivid. The road is not only a physical passage but a corridor through perception, where the interplay of light, shadow, and sound creates a dynamic narrative. Observers carry with them an enduring sense of the canyon's presence, an acknowledgement that the landscape is alive with subtle interactions that transcend ordinary experience. By dawn, the canyon returns to a quieter state. Shadows shrink with the rising sun. The air warms, and natural sounds resume: a birdsong, wind over rock, and the hum of distant activity. Figures vanish completely from sight. Voices fade, leaving the observer with only memory and the knowledge that Ghost Canyon Border Road holds stories, impressions, and subtle phenomena that endure beyond what the eye can capture. The road endures as both a natural wonder and a space of subtle mystery. Steep cliffs, winding turns, echoes, and fleeting shadows combine to create an environment that is at once tangible and ethereal. Visitors experience the canyon through sight, sound, and awareness, encountering a landscape that reveals not only geological history but also the lingering impressions of human passage and the uncanny presence of the unseen. Ghost Canyon Border Road remains a place where nature, history, and perception converge, inviting all who traverse it to observe carefully, listen closely, and appreciate the interplay of light, shadow, and memory across the vast canyon expanse. Sun-bleached route stretches across the desert like a ribbon of pale asphalt, flat and endless, vanishing into the horizon where sky and earth merge in heat-haze distance. By day, the road is a study in stark contrasts: pale stone and dust, the occasional scrubby plant, and miles of unbroken sunlight reflecting off the sun-bleached surface. The air shimmers in waves, creating the illusion of motion in the distance, a mirage that tricks the eye and stretches perception. Travelers on the route during daylight feel the vastness immediately. There are no curves, no ridges to break the horizon. The landscape moves subtly with the eye, yet the road itself feels unchanging, infinite. Each mile appears identical to the last, a monotony of light, sand, and pale pavement that draws focus to the sky and the distant point where the road disappears. As the sun sets, the route begins to transform. Shadows stretch across the flat terrain, merging and shifting with subtle changes in the terrain and the faint rise and fall of distant dunes. The color of the asphalt changes under the low sun, taking on muted pinks and oranges before fading to pale gray in twilight. With the decline of light comes a new sensation: the horizon seems to carry movement where none should exist. Glowing lights appear at night. Observers report points of light moving along the horizon, often against the direction of the wind. They drift across the emptiness with no sound, no discernible source, and no vehicle to accompany them. Sometimes they appear faint, a pale glow hovering over the flat landscape. Other times, they brighten briefly, then vanish as though swallowed by the darkness. The lights do not behave predictably, they accelerate, pause, or change course subtly, yet always maintain a distant, elusive presence. Drivers on the route describe a growing sense of unease. A presence is felt inside the vehicle, a weight or awareness that is not physical but impossible to ignore. The sensation is fleeting, like a brush of attention rather than contact, yet it lingers long enough to be disconcerting. Mirrors seem to reflect shapes that are not there. Shadows move across the dashboard and seats without source. The road itself feels alive in response to observation, as if it registers and acknowledges the traveler. The emptiness amplifies every perception. Wind carries faint noises from the desert, the scrape of loose stones, the distant call of an animal, the occasional creak of the vehicle. These sounds are amplified against the flat horizon, creating the impression of movement or proximity where none exists. Every shift in light or reflection becomes a potential signal, drawing attention to the space beyond the windshield and along the road. Travelers often report temporal distortion. Minutes stretch unpredictably as attention is drawn to distant lights or the shifting horizon. The monotony of the road and the faint movements of lights and shadows create the impression that distance and time are not fixed. Drivers feel the passage of hours as though compressed or elongated, reinforcing the sense that sun-bleached route exists outside ordinary perception. Local accounts describe similar experiences across decades. Seeing lights on the horizon, sensing presences in the vehicle, and feeling a subtle shift in the environment that defies explanation. Only to find emptiness and an unchanging road that stretches farther than memory suggests. Hinting at a consistent pattern tied to the landscape itself. Faint moonlight or passing vehicle headlights interact with the pale pavement, casting long shadows across the desert floor. The shifting angles can make distant shapes appear closer, distant lights seem to move, and empty stretches feel populated. Observers note that perception is heightened when light is low, creating illusions of presence along the horizon and within the vehicle. Even brief stops do not always alleviate the effect. Stepping outside or pausing the vehicle does not always reveal the source of the lights or presence. The desert remains quiet, flat, and still. Yet the feeling of being observed, of movement just beyond sight, persists. The effect is subtle, never threatening, but unmistakable to those who experience it. Sun-bleached route is as much a psychological landscape as a physical one. Its flatness, monotony, and exposure to horizon and sky create conditions that heighten awareness, amplify perception, and challenge ordinary interpretation of movement and distance. Lights, shadows, and the sense of presence combine to produce an experience both beautiful and unsettling. Even after leaving the road, travelers remember the sensation. The distant glow, the shifting horizon, the inexplicable weight inside the vehicle. These impressions linger, forming a narrative of perception, anticipation, and quiet tension. Where flat desert meets infinite sky, where lights appear without source, and where presence is felt without form. Every journey along its length becomes a passage through both landscape and perception, a confrontation with emptiness that is alive with subtle movement. And a road where the ordinary and the extraordinary meet under the sun and stars. Sandstone spur winds through a rugged landscape, its narrow road flanked by jagged rock formations that rise abruptly on either side. The stone is deep red and ochre, weathered over centuries, forming sharp ridges, steep walls, and precarious outcrops. Sunlight strikes the spurs unevenly, creating stark contrasts of light and shadow. Loose gravel and sand cover portions of the pavement, shifting under tires and boots, adding a sense of caution for every step or turn. The wind moves freely through the crevices, carrying the scent of dry earth and sparse vegetation clinging stubbornly to the cliffs. Travelers quickly notice subtle but unsettling sounds. From seemingly nowhere comes the scraping of metal across pavement. It is uneven, intermittent, sometimes soft and distant, other times startlingly close. The sound resembles chains dragging, though no chains or vehicles are visible. The sound echoes between the stone spurs, amplifying unpredictably, as if following the curves of the road. Drivers and hikers alike pause instinctively, scanning the formations, yet find nothing to explain the noise. The sensation is fleeting but persistent, creating an immediate awareness of the environment that feels both alive and indifferent. Shadows appear in peripheral vision. Along cliff edges, in narrow gaps between rock faces, and across the road itself, dark shapes shift and move. They are indistinct, elongated by angle and light, but humanoid in form. Figures appear to walk between the spurs, disappearing when directly approached. Observers often describe the movement as deliberate, following paths that conform to the terrain. No footprints, no disturbed gravel, and no trace of physical presence remain behind. The shapes are fleeting, yet their consistency produces a sense of active observation within the landscape. The road itself enhances these phenomena. Narrow passages and towering rock faces create natural echo chambers, amplifying sound and exaggerating movement. Sunlight filtering through crevices casts dynamic patterns on pavement and cliffs. Even minor gusts of wind interact with loose rock, creating noises easily interpreted as footsteps or dragging metal. The interplay of light, sound, and wind combines to heighten perception, producing an environment in which ordinary features take on extraordinary qualities. Visitors often experience a shift in time perception. Footsteps echo in irregular patterns. Scraping sounds arrive seemingly ahead or behind the observer, producing the sensation of movement in multiple directions simultaneously. Shadows stretch and contract with the sun's passage, merging with rock and terrain. Minutes can feel longer, while distance becomes difficult to judge. Every step requires focus, and pausing intensifies awareness of surroundings. The mind begins to fill gaps in perception, interpreting ambiguous stimuli as meaningful presence. Historical accounts provide context for the area. Sandstone spur follows paths used for centuries by explorers, settlers, and travelers navigating the cliffs. Horses, wagons, and pack animals moved carefully along the narrow roadway. Stories of accidents and misfortune have circulated over time, with travelers disappearing or becoming stranded in isolated sections. Locals speak quietly of echoes left by past passage, and some suggest the sounds and figures observed today are remnants of these historical movements, embedded in the environment. Natural explanations offer partial clarity. Stone channels wind in complex ways, producing scraping and clattering that travels unpredictably. Shadows distort based on angle, light, and surface texture. Loose gravel and uneven pavement create sound when disturbed, while shifting sunlight and wind alter visual perception. Or for the combination of auditory and visual phenomena reported by multiple visitors over time. Or for the sensation of presence that accompanies them. Evening travel intensifies experiences along Sandstone Spur. Sun dips low, shadows stretch dramatically across rock faces and roadway. The scraping sound appears more prominent, traveling farther along narrow passages. Figures become more distinct against fading light, moving between spurs or along ledges. The wind carries a layered effect, blending natural echoes with the perception of deliberate motion. Observers feel a heightened pull toward awareness of the cliffs, a sense that attention is both guided and tested by the environment. Drivers and hikers describe lingering effects after leaving the road. A sense of presence persists, footsteps and scraping echo faintly in memory. Shadows appear to linger in peripheral vision even on open terrain. The environment leaves an impression of being simultaneously familiar and unknowable, reinforcing awareness of space, sound, and movement. Visitors retain an acute consciousness of subtle environmental cues long after departure. Sandstone Spur continues to be accessible, offering dramatic scenery, geological interest, and hiking opportunities. By evening or under changing light and wind, the road becomes an immersive environment. Sounds, shadows, and perception interact, producing experiences that are both compelling and mysterious. Visitors navigate a landscape where natural features, history, and attention converge, leaving a lasting impression of both beauty and intrigue. The spurs, cliffs, and narrow roadways preserve more than rock. They hold echoes of movement, patterns of passage, and perceptual cues that engage the senses. Scraping sounds, fleeting figures, and shifting shadows converge to create an environment that is alive in perception. A space where history, terrain, and awareness intertwine. Travelers along Sandstone Spur encounter more than pavement and stone. They experience a landscape that shapes observation, challenges perception, and lingers in memory long after the cliffs fade from view. Dead Man's Curve rises sharply from the road, a sharp bend carved into the landscape that has claimed vehicles for decades. Asphalt glints in sunlight, worn smooth by tires, while guardrails are dented and scarred from countless impacts. Trees press close to the roadway, their shadows stretching across the curve and into the ditch below. The area feels tight, constricted, a place where speed and inattention meet consequences almost immediately. Mirrors catch glimpses of the road behind, tires hum against the worn pavement, and engines respond to gentle adjustments in steering. The curve appears normal, yet something about it commands heightened attention. Observers describe a subtle shift in perception as they near the midpoint, a sense that the road itself is aware of movement and speed. Pale figures sometimes appear near the roadside. They stand on the edge of the asphalt or in the shallow ditch, their form humanoid but ethereal, clothing faded or indistinct. Observers report the figures raising a hand or stepping slightly forward as if signaling, warning drivers to slow down. Step toward the figure and it dissolves into air, leaving only empty space where form once existed. The figures reappear repeatedly. Drivers who pass the curve and continue along the road often report seeing the same figure further ahead, standing in a similar posture, waiting at the next visible point of the curve. The recurrence creates a sense of continuity, as if the figure is not bound to a single spot but moves with travelers, observing and guiding them along the bend. The road amplifies perception. Guardrails, shadows, and the curvature of the asphalt create visual cues that exaggerate depth and speed. Headlights at night cast long, thin beams across trees and rocks, revealing the figure in flashes. Movement of light and shadow can create fleeting impressions of motion where none exists, enhancing the sensation of awareness and presence. Historical context explains some experiences. Dead Man's Curve has long been notorious for accidents. Vehicles have gone off the road at speed, some disappearing into trees or down embankments. The location's reputation grew over decades, passing from local memory to legend. Reports of apparitions may be linked to both the trauma of the site and the collective awareness of its danger. Pale, humanoid, standing with a gesture of warning. Observers note that they do not threaten but serve as silent guides. Night heightens the phenomenon. Shadows deepen, headlights cut through darkness in narrow cones. The bend feels tighter, the curve sharper. Figures are more visible against the darkened roadside, their form more distinct yet still fleeting. The repetition of sighting along the curve is more pronounced at night, producing a sense of being followed or monitored, yet without aggression. Engines hum differently as the vehicle rounds the curve. Tires squeal lightly on worn asphalt. Some observers report faint echoes of steps, as if accompanying the car along the bend. Wind may amplify small sounds from trees or guardrails, creating the impression of movement beyond the visual experience. Drivers report emotional impact. Awareness sharpens. Heart rate increases. Attention narrows. The combination of figure, sound, and terrain produces a subtle fear, not of harm, but of misjudgment and consequence. Many describe instinctively reducing speed, aligning with the apparent intention of the apparition. The curve retains memory of the past. Vehicles, accidents, and human presence are recorded in both physical marks on the asphalt and in the perception of those who travel it. Guardrails, ruts, and scarred pavement are reminders of previous passage. Figures are seen as part of that memory, echoes of those who experienced the consequences firsthand or collectively remembered by locals over decades. Repetition creates continuity. The same figure appearing after passing the curve reinforces the sense of awareness and intentionality. Drivers describe a coherent experience, a pattern in which the apparition is linked to safety and caution. The sight becomes both a physical and psychological landscape, guiding attention and behavior. Guiding attention and behavior along a stretch of road with a history of accidents. Daylight diminishes the phenomenon. Figures become harder to see in bright light. Shadows shrink. Sounds are less pronounced. The road appears ordinary, its notoriety hidden beneath sun and clarity. Drivers report relief, though memory of past experiences lingers. A mental imprint of attention and caution reinforced by previous stories and observations. The road remains sharp, asphalt scarred and smooth. Guardrails bearing dents, and the landscape carved by repeated passage. Figures appear and vanish, footsteps echo. And warnings drift through perception without direct explanation. Travelers leave with heightened awareness, a sense of presence. And a memory of guidance that transcends sight. Dead man's curve endures. Visitors depart carrying impressions. They recall pale figures signaling. The repetition of sighting along the curve. Footsteps echoing alongside them. And the instinctive urge to slow down. The bend remains dangerous, memorable, and mysterious. Its legacy persists in both the landscape and the perception of those who traverse it. A testament to the intersection of history, caution, and subtle, unexplained presence along Dead Man's Curve. Iron Mesa Road stretches along a rugged landscape, flanked by towering mesas that rise sharply from the desert floor. Their sheer faces cast long shadows that creep across the winding asphalt, narrowing the perceived width of the road. During daylight, the formations reveal layers of iron-rich rock, deep reds and browns streaked with lighter minerals. Sunlight glints on ledges and crevices, highlighting the raw beauty of erosion over millennia. The terrain is imposing. High mesas loom overhead, creating a sense of enclosure despite the open desert beyond. The cliffs form natural corridors, forcing travelers to follow the winding path and amplifying both sound and perception. Each curve of the road presents new angles of shadow and light, with steep drop-offs and jagged rocks just beyond guardrails. Hikers and drivers alike sense the grandeur, yet feel the presence of a landscape that can overwhelm the senses. As evening approaches, the road transforms. Shadows deepen along cliff faces and mesas, merging into uniform darkness that obscures detail and distance. The shift in light enhances the perception of scale, making the mesas appear taller, the shadows deeper, and the road narrower. Ordinary features take on a more ominous character, and travelers report heightened awareness of every sound and movement. Footsteps are often heard echoing above the road. The sounds are distinct, human in cadence, yet no one is visible on the cliffs or mesas. Travelers report that the echoes seem to follow their movement, appearing along stretches of road where no trail or ledge exists. The auditory phenomenon creates tension, a sense that the environment is aware and responsive to those who pass beneath. Lights occasionally flicker from cliff faces. Small points of illumination appear on rock ledges, bright enough to be noticed yet too brief or inconsistent to identify a source. Travelers often pause to look, only to find the rock face empty and still. The flickering lights appear at different elevations, sometimes far above the road, enhancing the perception of depth and verticality. The effect contributes to the impression that the mesas are active, observing, or alive with subtle energy. The combination of shadows, echoes, and lights produces a layered sensory experience. Drivers describe a feeling of weight pressing through the air, a quiet awareness that the road is more than a corridor for travel. Hikers note the need to move deliberately, scanning the environment for both footing and anomalies. The high mesas dominate both sight and perception, shaping attention in a way that amplifies every sound, every movement, every change in light. The terrain itself reinforces these impressions. Narrow curves, loose gravel, and uneven asphalt require careful navigation. Wind funnels through gaps in the mesas, carrying sound and altering perception of direction. Echoes of distant wildlife combine with human-like footsteps to blur boundaries between reality and suggestion. The environment demands attention, subtly influencing behavior and heightening awareness without overt threat. Travelers often report a sense of rhythm along Iron Mesa Road. Footsteps echoing above appear at intervals that coincide with curves, slopes, or narrowing passages. Flickering lights on cliffs punctuate moments of stillness, producing anticipation and subtle tension. Shadows stretch along rock faces and across the road, interacting with ambient light to produce impressions of movement and depth. These phenomena encourage careful pacing and observation, fostering immersion in the environment. Travelers often report a sense of rhythm along Iron Mesa Road. Historical context provides insight into the area. Iron Mesa Road passes through terrain that was once traversed by indigenous peoples and early explorers. The mesas, with their sheer faces and hidden ledges, offered both shelter and challenge, shaping patterns of movement. Over time, the road was established to provide access through this rugged landscape. The features that now produce shadows, echoes, and flickering lights are part of a natural topography that has interacted with human activity for centuries, embedding subtle cues into the environment. The road remains navigable and frequented despite its reputation. Travelers continue to drive, hike, and explore, drawn by both scenery and challenge. Awareness is essential. Observing patterns of shadow, listening for the echoing footsteps, noting the occasional flickering light, and maintaining careful attention to terrain allows passage without incident. The environment communicates indirectly, creating perception-driven experiences that blend natural phenomena with sensory interpretation. Night accentuates the effects. Shadows deepen into darkness, cliffs loom over the asphalt, and points of flickering light are more pronounced against black rock. Footsteps echo more clearly, seeming closer and more deliberate. Travelers report that remaining stationary for even brief moments heightens the perception of presence, while movement maintains focus and orientation. Awareness of space, sound, and light becomes paramount, blending caution with curiosity. By dawn, Iron Mesa Road returns to a quieter state. Shadows shorten, light reveals textures and layers of rock. Echoes fade into ambient desert sounds. Flickering lights vanish, and the road appears ordinary once more. Travelers leave with impressions of scale, awareness, and subtle presence. The experience lingers, a combination of natural environment, historical context, and perception shaped by the unique geography of high mesas and shadowed cliffs. Iron Mesa Road endures as a place where light, shadow, and sound converge to create a layered, immersive experience. High cliffs dominate the landscape, echoes of footsteps reverberate unpredictably, and flickering lights hint at unseen forms. Travelers learn to navigate with attention, observe carefully, and respect the interplay of terrain and perception. The road offers both challenge and fascination, a location where the natural world interacts subtly with human awareness, leaving a lasting impression long after passage. Red Rock Crossing winds through narrow canyons carved from deep red sandstone, the walls rising abruptly on either side of the asphalt. Sunlight illuminates striations in the rock, highlighting layers formed over millions of years, and casting long, shifting shadows along the road. The curves are tight, the turns sharp, and the canyon walls close in as if enclosing travelers within their folds. The air carries the dry scent of stone and sand, mixed with the occasional trace of desert flora clinging to cracks and ledges. The road feels isolated, a corridor through a landscape both majestic and foreboding. During daylight, Red Rock Crossing is visually stunning. Birds will above the canyon edges, and the texture of weathered rock creates a landscape of intricate detail. Drivers and hikers alike notice the dramatic geology and the quiet stillness of the canyons, absorbing the sense of scale and the rugged beauty of the surroundings. As the sun lowers, the canyon atmosphere shifts. Visitors report seeing figures beside the road, kneeling or standing silently. The forms appear human in outline but lack detail, merging with shadows and contours of the canyon walls. Observers often catch these figures out of the corner of the eye. When directly focused upon, they vanish, leaving only the barren rock behind. Alongside the visual phenomena, whispering can be heard. The voices drift through the canyon, soft at first, almost indistinguishable from the wind moving across the rock. As the sound draws attention, it becomes more distinct, conveying urgency and warning, as if urging travelers to turn back. The whispers seem to move with the observer, appearing from multiple directions and fading when approached, enhancing the sense of presence and observation within the canyon. The geography of Red Rock Crossing amplifies these perceptions. Narrow passages and overhanging cliffs carry sound unpredictably, allowing whispers and natural echoes to overlap in ways that seem intentional. Light interacts with the rock surfaces, creating shifting patterns that can suggest movement even when the terrain is empty. The combination of visual and auditory effects produces an immersive experience, compelling travelers to move cautiously while remaining alert to their surroundings. Visitors describe physical responses to these phenomena. A sudden chill may sweep along the canyon floor, brushing against the skin as though an unseen presence has passed. Heartbeats quicken at the sound of whispering or the fleeting glimpse of a figure. Shadows appear to shift subtly with movement, and the mind instinctively interprets forms and sounds as deliberate action, creating an awareness of the environment that goes beyond ordinary observation. Historical accounts provide context for the canyon's reputation. The area has been traversed for centuries by indigenous peoples, traders, and settlers. Stories passed down describe travelers encountering figures along the road or hearing voices carried by the canyon wind. Over generations, these accounts became part of local lore, lending the area an enduring sense of mystery and caution. The experience is heightened during dusk and twilight. The fading sun casts the canyon walls in deep red and brown tones, while shadows stretch across the road and over ledges. Figures appear more pronounced in this light, their outlines stark against the darkening rock. Whispering rises and falls with the movement of the wind, creating the impression of layered voices and multiple presences. Observers often report that the canyon feels alive, aware of those moving through it, responsive to attention and motion. Despite the eerie impressions, Red Rock Crossing remains physically safe. The phenomena are perceptual and subtle, producing heightened awareness rather than danger. Travelers learn to navigate with caution, mindful of turns, curves, and the illusions of the canyon's depths. The combination of light, shadow, sound, and topography creates a space where history, geography, and perception intersect, producing a memorable experience that engages sight, hearing, and intuition. The combination of light, shadow, sound, and topography creates a space where history, geography, and perception intersect, producing a memorable experience that engages sight, hearing, and intuition. By dawn, the canyon returns to calm. Shadows shorten. Whispers fade. And the figures vanish, leaving only the rugged red rock and the winding road. Travelers reflect on the experience, remembering fleeting forms, the sound of urgent voices, and the heightened perception of the landscape. The canyon remains unchanged in form, yet the impression of presence and observation lingers. A reminder of the subtle and persistent character of the land. Red Rock Crossing endures as a place of natural beauty, geological significance, and subtle mystery. Long stretches of narrow road, towering cliffs, fleeting figures, and whispering wind combine to create an environment that engages visitors beyond the ordinary. Those who traverse the canyon do more than travel a road, they experience a space where history, perception, and the landscape converge, where shadows move, voices echo, and the natural world communicates in ways that endure in memory long after the journey has ended. Dune Shadow Trail winds through a landscape of rolling desert, where endless sand stretches in every direction, golden in daylight and silver under moonlight. Where endless sand stretches in every direction, golden in daylight and silver under moonlight. The dunes rise and fall like frozen waves, their curves sculpted by wind and time, shifting imperceptibly yet persistently. The dunes rise and fall like frozen waves, their curves sculpted by wind and time, shifting imperceptibly yet persistently. The dunes rise and fall like frozen waves, their curves sculpted by wind and time, shifting imperceptibly yet persistently. The trail itself is little more than a narrow path across the vastness, worn by vehicles, hikers, and the occasional passage of animals. The trail itself is little more than a narrow path across the vastness, worn by vehicles, hikers, and the occasional passage of animals. The trail itself is little more than a narrow path across the vastness, worn by vehicles, hikers, and the occasional passage of animals. The air carries the scent of dry earth and faint mineral tang, mingling with the ever-present heat during the day and the cold at night. The air carries the scent of dry earth and faint mineral tang, mingling with the ever-present heat during the day and the cold at night. The air carries the scent of dry earth and faint mineral tang, mingling with the ever-present heat during the day and the cold at night. The air carries the scent of dry earth and faint mineral tang, mingling with the ever-present heat during the day and the cold at night. The air carries the scent of dry earth and faint mineral tang, mingling with the ever-present heat during the day and the cold at night. Travelers notice the scale immediately. There is no horizon that does not curve with the dunes, no landmark that remains fixed across miles of sand. Every ridge and depression changes subtly with the wind, erasing paths and revealing new ones. The landscape is beautiful and stark, inviting yet disorienting, a place where perception and distance can deceive the most experienced observer. Nightfall transforms the trail. Shadows stretch across the dunes, merging valleys and ridges into patterns that appear to move with the observer. The moon casts pale light, illuminating the sand in faint washes, leaving the hollows in deep, inky darkness. The environment becomes alive in perception, shifting subtly in response to every glance and step. Footprints that appear near vehicles at night suggest movement, small indentations in the sand running parallel or alongside tire tracks. They seem fresh, deliberate, and yet no one is visible. By morning, the footprints vanish. The wind has erased them, or the sand has reclaimed its surface in a way that leaves the path untouched. Observers are left with the sensation that something passed alongside, present for a moment and gone before it could be confirmed. The impermanence of these marks adds to the canyon of experience, leaving travelers unsure whether they witnessed reality or the echo of perception amplified by the desert night. Ghostly riders are occasionally reported along the dunes. Figures on horseback appear at distances, silhouetted against ridges or the pale moonlight. They move slowly or at a steady trot, maintaining posture and form as though aware of the observer. When approached, the figures vanish instantly, dissolving into sand, shadow, and wind. There is no sound of hooves on the dunes, no trace of horses or riders, and yet the impression of presence is unmistakable. Shifting dunes bend light and sound. Wind carries faint noises across vast expanses, creating echoes and illusions that mimic movement. The vast scale stretches perception, making distant shapes appear closer, and shadows seem animate. Even the smallest ripple of sand can suggest motion where none exists, heightening the sense of awareness and presence. Travelers report physical sensations accompanying these sightings. A sudden awareness of being watched, a tightening in the chest, or the faint impression of motion alongside the vehicle or path. These experiences are subtle, fleeting, and never threatening, yet they leave a lasting imprint, reinforcing the idea that the desert holds more than visible forms. The combination of visual and tactile perception creates a heightened state of alertness, making each step, turn, and glance meaningful. Minutes stretch and contract as observation shifts between horizon and dunes. Distance becomes difficult to judge. The trail has a history intertwined with its geography. A figure on a ridge may appear within reach, only to vanish as the observer moves. The desert manipulates awareness, creating a sense of movement, urgency, and impermanence that challenges conventional understanding of space and time. Nomadic travelers, explorers, and settlers have used the route for decades, perhaps centuries. Vehicles, horses, and foot traffic have all left traces, some impermanent, some lasting. The dunes themselves preserve the memory of travel, marking the surface subtly while allowing wind to reshape it continuously. The combination of history and natural process may contribute to the perception of fleeting figures and footprints alongside the trail. Even so, the experience is more than geology. Witnesses consistently report similar phenomena, footprints appearing and vanishing. Figures on horseback silhouetted against dunes. And a palpable sense of presence. The repetition suggests a pattern that transcends natural explanation alone. Observers feel acknowledged by the desert without ever seeing a person. Guided by perception more than interaction. Light plays a crucial role in the phenomena. Moonlight, starlight, and faint glows across the sand create shadows and highlights that appear animate. Slight variations in wind or sand texture can produce subtle movements, forming shapes in the periphery that vanish when focused upon directly. The interplay of light and topography reinforces the impression of figures, tracks, and presence. Even after leaving the dunes, impressions remain. Travelers recount the sensation of accompaniment. The fleeting visuals of riders, and the knowledge that something passed alongside the path unnoticed. These experiences linger, carried in memory as an echo of the desert's persistent, quiet engagement with those who traverse it. Dune Shadow Trail endures as a landscape where perception and environment converge. Every passage along the trail offers a unique encounter, ensuring that Dune Shadow Trail remains both mesmerizing and unsettling. Thornbrush Highway stretches endlessly through a stark desert landscape, flanked on either side by dense brush, cacti, and jagged desert plants. The sun beats down relentlessly during the day, casting harsh shadows that accentuate every contour of the terrain. The road itself is narrow, paved in places but cracked and uneven in others, winding between natural formations that rise abruptly from the sand. Dust drifts lazily across the pavement, stirred occasionally by passing vehicles or sudden gusts of wind. Travelers quickly notice the feeling of isolation. The dense brush limits sightlines, and the terrain curves and dips in ways that obscure long distances. Movement in the vegetation is easily hidden, allowing anything that might be present to remain unseen until it chooses to reveal itself. The landscape is alive with subtle sound, the whisper of wind through cactus spines, the occasional rustle of dry leaves, and the distant cawing of desert birds. Every small sound is magnified against the backdrop of emptiness, creating an environment that draws attention to subtle changes. Creating an environment that draws attention to subtle changes. Figures sometimes appear along the sides of the highway. Observers describe crouched shapes hiding behind brush or clusters of cacti. Visible for only a moment before vanishing completely as the vehicle approaches. The figures do not move predictably, yet their timing and location suggest awareness of observers. Attempting to focus on them causes the shapes to dissolve into the brush, leaving only the harsh desert landscape behind. Leaving only the harsh desert landscape behind. The environment contributes to perception. Light filters unevenly through the vegetation, casting long shadows across the road. Movement of air, dust, and plant matter can mimic human or animal motion. These natural factors interact with the mind, creating the impression of figures where none exist. Yet the reports are consistent. Multiple visitors, at different times and under varying conditions, describe similar appearances, movements, and timing of figures along the highway. Temperature changes are another unusual feature. In the middle of scorching desert heat, travelers sometimes feel sudden gusts of cold air. The shift is abrupt, chilling the skin, and causing drivers and passengers to pause instinctively. These gusts appear without visible source. Sometimes near bends or dips in the road. At other times across open stretches. They intensify awareness of surroundings, creating a sense that the landscape itself is reacting to movement and attention. Sound plays a critical role in the experience. Whine through desert brush carries whispers that seem directional, following the vehicle or appearing to originate from figures in the vegetation. Leaves rustle, branches creak, and dust skitters across pavement, all contributing to a layered auditory environment. Echoes bounce off distant rock formations, further complicating the perception of source and direction. Even familiar noises, like tires on cracked pavement, take on unusual character, blending with environmental cues to heighten awareness. Travelers often describe a feeling of being observed. Shadows shift across the road and surrounding terrain, brushing against peripheral vision, reinforcing the sense of presence without revealing physical reality, drawing travelers into the experience. Historical context frames the environment. Thornbrush Highway follows old routes used for exploration, travel, and commerce across the desert. Settlers, traders, and local inhabitants navigated these trails for generations, using vegetation and terrain for guidance and shelter. Stories of travelers becoming lost or encountering unexplained phenomena have persisted, forming a rich backdrop for contemporary experiences. The highway itself has witnessed countless footsteps, wheels, and journeys, embedding patterns of movement into the landscape over time. Natural factors explain some phenomena. Wind tunnels between brush and rock create sudden gusts. Shadows and shifting light alter perception of shape and movement. The density of vegetation conceals small animals or debris that could mimic figures. Dry sand and loose gravel create scraping and shifting sounds. Yet the consistency and specificity of reports suggest the environment does more than provide optical illusions. It engages perception in ways that are immersive and reproducible. Evening and twilight magnify the effects. Shadows lengthen and deepen across the road and surrounding desert, blending with brush and cacti. Cold gusts become more pronounced as temperatures drop. Figures appear more sharply in peripheral vision, moving along edges of the road or among brush clusters. Whispers ride the wind, soft yet persistent, following vehicles along curves and dips in the highway. The combined effect of light, shadow, sound, and temperature produces an environment that is simultaneously beautiful, isolating, and uncanny. Travelers leaving Thornbrush Highway often report lingering impressions. The sensation of movement in the brush, the unexpected gusts of cold air, and the fleeting shapes remain in memory, even after returning to open desert or civilization. Observers describe heightened awareness of sound, shadow, and spatial orientation. The highway becomes more than a route, it is an environment that shapes perception, encourages attention, and leaves a lasting impression of both natural beauty and subtle mystery. Thornbrush Highway continues to be traversed by drivers, hikers, and explorers. By day, it offers dramatic desert scenery, jagged rock formations, and challenging terrain. By evening or under shifting conditions, the road transforms into an immersive landscape where perception, history, and environment intersect. Figures crouch, cold gusts arise, and whispers drift across brush, creating experiences that are compelling, memorable, and unique. The highway remains a place where attention and observation are rewarded, where natural features interact with human awareness, and where the desert holds echoes of movement and presence that endure long after the journey has ended. Sandstorm Path stretches across a desolate stretch of desert, where dunes rise and fall in rolling waves of sand under an unrelenting sky. Vehicles move cautiously along the trail. Engines hum steadily, tires kicking up loose sand. Drivers keep hands firm on the wheel, eyes scanning the limited range of sight. The air is thick, abrasive, and uneven, as gusts sweep across the open terrain. Dust scratches the surface of windshields and skin, and every sound is muffled, swallowed by the roar of moving sand. Figures sometimes appear within the storm. Human-like shapes emerge through swirling clouds of sand, partially visible and distorted by the particles around them. They seem to follow vehicles, appearing at different angles along the path. Observers describe them as pale, fleeting, and ethereal. Moving with a rhythm that mirrors the speed of the vehicle without overtly approaching. The figures vanish when approached. Shift slightly to look directly, and they dissolve into the storm, leaving only swirling sand. Observers report the impression of awareness, as if the shapes track attention and anticipate movement, yet maintain distance. The presence is unsettling, silent, and deliberate, forming a pattern that repeats along the path. Whispers rise with the wind. Soft, hissing sounds ride the gusts, sometimes articulating words, sometimes forming fragments of speech. Names are occasionally discernible, followed by warnings or murmurs that are impossible to locate. The sound is layered with the rush of sand, creating the impression of multiple voices echoing through the storm. Listeners feel the words pass close, brushing against consciousness, leaving an impression of intent and awareness. The path manipulates perception. Dunes bend light, distort depth, and create mirages that appear like distant vehicles or structures. The swirling storm amplifies these effects, making movement and presence difficult to interpret. Observers report an expanded sense of space, as if the storm stretches or contracts the terrain unpredictably, creating uncertainty about distance and direction. Historical context illuminates the phenomenon. Accounts describe sudden storms, lost travelers, and navigation errors caused by shifting sands. Vehicles and people vanished unexpectedly during harsh weather, leaving the land marked by memory and story. The figures may reflect echoes of those who traversed the path, captured in perception by the environment itself. They match the pace and rhythm, staying near enough to be noticed yet remaining partially obscured. Drivers describe the experience as both familiar and uncanny, a presence that monitors progress without interference. Each reappearance reinforces the sense that the storm carries memory along its wind currents. Shadows deepen, the sand turns to gray under moonlight, and the storm becomes more opaque. Figures are harder to identify but more distinct in outline. Whispers become clearer, rising above the wind, suggesting attention or caution. Observers report a heightened awareness, focusing on the road, the storm, and the impression of following presence. The combination of elements produces profound psychological impact. Heart rates increase, vision sharpens, and the mind perceives movement and intention even when none is physically present. Drivers and travelers report instinctively slowing down, adjusting course, or pausing, influenced by unseen observation and the rhythmic repetition of forms and sound. The environment communicates indirectly, through shape, sound, and timing, guiding perception and behavior along a hazardous trail. Dawn restores clarity. As light spreads across the desert, the storm dissipates. The storm dissipates. The storm, figures, and voices remains vivid. The path returns to ordinary appearance, sand and light behaving predictably. Sand and light behaving predictably. Travelers feel relief, though the memory of the storm, figures, and voices remains vivid. The trail continues to stretch across open desert, shifting with wind and time. Figures appear and vanish, whispers rise and fade. And the storm carries both illusion and memory along its course. Observers leave with heightened awareness, a sense of attentive presence, and an understanding that the desert is more than land and sand. It is a living landscape that preserves echoes of motion, caution, and observation across generations of travelers. Visitors depart carrying impressions. They recall pale figures emerging from dust, footsteps matching their own, and whispers that seem to speak directly to them. The highway remains long and isolated, yet alive in perception, a place where memory, environment, and human attention converge. Sandstorm Path continues to challenge the senses, revealing that even in emptiness, presence can endure, warning and observing without ever fully revealing itself. Iron Gate Road stretches across a quiet landscape where trees lean close to the asphalt and fields give way to overgrown pastures. Rusty old gates line portions of the route, standing on creaking hinges that have long outlived their original use. During the day, the road seems ordinary. Sunlight glints on chipped paint and corroded metal, highlighting the textures of decay and the passage of time. Weeds grow along fence lines, pushing through cracks in the earth, softening the harsh angles of the gates. As evening approaches, the character of the road changes. Shadows from trees and gates stretch across the pavement, elongating with the setting sun. Light becomes inconsistent, alternating between pools of brightness and dark corners, creating visual patterns that play tricks on perception. The rusty gates, once stationary, appear to sway slightly in the wind, and the shadows they cast seem to shift independently. The road begins to feel narrower, as if enclosed by both stone and imagination. When night falls, the gates take on a different presence. They creak and swing on their own, without wind or disturbance. The sound is subtle at first, a low groan or a whisper of metal against post, but it carries across the quiet road. Each movement draws attention, reinforcing the idea that the gates are active in some way, responding to the passage of travelers. Hikers and drivers alike report pausing when they hear these sounds, uncertain whether to approach or retreat. Shadowy figures are sometimes seen standing beside the gates. They appear as silhouettes, human in form, yet unmoving and silent. Their clothing is indistinct, blending into the darkness. When observers turn to face them directly, the figures vanish. They do not move elsewhere. They do not interact. They simply exist at the edge of perception, their presence enough to produce awareness and caution. The terrain amplifies the effect. The road curves gently, with slight inclines and declines, allowing echoes to carry and change pitch. Footsteps along asphalt or gravel seem amplified in some spots, softened in others, creating the illusion of multiple presences. The creaking gates add rhythm to the soundscape, producing an auditory experience that feels responsive and layered. Travelers report heightened attention to every detail, noting subtle movements, shifts in shadow, and the sound of metal. Light and shadow interact with the gates in unusual ways. Moonlight reflecting off metal produces glimmers that appear as fleeting eyes or distant figures. Passing headlights from vehicles illuminate rusted surfaces and fence lines, creating fleeting silhouettes that vanish as quickly as they appear. Even ordinary details, like gaps in posts or chipped paint, take on significance, suggesting movement or presence where none exists. The history of Iron Gate Road enhances the perception of mystery. The gates were once functional, marking property boundaries or entrances to private land. Over time, they have fallen into disuse, yet they remain as physical markers of the past. Travelers report that the combination of rust, age, and sound produces a sense of memory embedded in the landscape, where the environment retains echoes of previous human activity. The experience along the road is immersive. The creaking gates, shifting shadows, and occasional glimpses of figures combine to create a narrative in which perception is heightened and caution is natural. The road communicates subtly, not through direct interaction, but through presence and suggestion. Even when no figures are visible, the gates maintain a sense of vigilance. The sound of hinges moving produces anticipation, and the mind fills in patterns where none exist. Observers report that moments of silence are as impactful as moments of movement, as the absence of sound emphasizes the environment's latent activity. Night accentuates these experiences. Shadows deepen along fence lines, the metal glows faintly in moonlight, and echoes carry farther along the asphalt. Figures at gates appear more clearly in peripheral vision, and footsteps, whether imagined or real, seem to follow the traveler along curves and inclines. The road demands attention, producing a blend of alertness and unease that heightens the journey through a space that is otherwise physically simple. By morning, Iron Gate Road appears calm once more. Gates stand still, shadows retreat, and the road returns to ordinary function. Vehicles pass without stalling. Hikers move freely without unusual perception. Yet those who experience the nighttime phenomena retain a lasting impression of presence, awareness, and subtle interaction. The road has communicated through sound, shadow, and suggestion, leaving a memory that persists beyond the immediate experience. Iron Gate Road endures as a location where light, shadow, sound, and perception converge. Rusty gates creak and swing, figures appear briefly beside posts, and echoes of footsteps carry through the darkness. Travelers learn to navigate with caution and attention, observing subtle cues while respecting the environment. The road offers an immersive experience, blending natural landscape, historical elements, and perceptual phenomena into a memorable journey that lingers long after departure. The road offers an immersive experience, blending natural landscape, historical elements, and perceptual phenomena into a memorable journey that lingers long after departure. Echo Canyon Road winds through deep, narrow canyons carved over millennia by water and wind, the rock walls rising sharply on either side of the asphalt. Sunlight glints off the sheer faces during the day, illuminating layers of red and brown stone etched with cracks and striations. Shadows twist and stretch across the road, following its curves and folds, creating a landscape of light and dark that shifts with every step or turn. The canyon floor is uneven in places, with occasional gravel patches and exposed rock, demanding careful navigation and attention to detail. During daylight hours, the road is serene yet imposing. Birds circle above the cliffs, calling to one another. And the wind moves through the canyon in gentle gusts, carrying the scent of stone, dust, and sparse desert vegetation. The sense of enclosure is palpable, with high walls preventing the view beyond, and emphasizing the linear journey along the asphalt. Drivers and hikers alike report that the canyon feels alive. Not in a threatening way, but as though the land itself holds awareness of movement within it. As the sun lowers toward evening, the canyon transforms. Shadows deepen along walls and overhangs, stretching across the road and folding into the crevices of stone. The acoustics change dramatically. Echoes in the canyon are unnatural, reflecting sound in unexpected ways. Drivers speaking or calling out hear their own voices return to them, all to read a slightly slower, slightly higher, or layered with subtle distortion. The sound seems amplified and warped, as if the canyon itself is reshaping the signal of human presence into a reflection both familiar and uncanny. Some travelers notice movement along the cliffs. Figures appear pacing above the road, shadowed against the rock faces. They mimic the movements of those driving or walking below, sometimes mirroring gestures or turning in time with the observer. The figures are indistinct, blurred at the edges, and vanish when approached directly. They leave no footprints or evidence of passage, yet the impression of presence is undeniable, creating a persistent awareness that the road is observed and engaged with, even in the absence of tangible life. The canyon amplifies every detail. Narrow passageways and overhanging ledges create natural echo chambers, allowing whispers and footsteps to carry in ways that distort timing and direction. Light filtering across jagged walls produces patterns that shift with perspective, making shadows appear to move independently of the sun. The combination of sound, shadow, and visual perception produces a layered experience that is immersive and disorienting, encouraging careful attention to surroundings. Travelers report physiological effects that accompany the experience. A sudden chill can move along the asphalt, brushing against skin unexpectedly. Heart rates increase when echoes arrive altered or distorted. Perception of scale and distance becomes uncertain, with cliffs appearing taller or closer than they are. Even when no figures are visible, the sensation of observation persists, producing heightened awareness of movement, sound, and space. Historical context adds depth to the phenomena. Echo Canyon Road follows ancient pathways once traversed by indigenous peoples, traders, and early settlers. The canyon has long been known for its acoustics, with echoes and wind carrying sound across stone walls. Over time, stories developed describing figures appearing on ledges and voices returning altered. The landscape, shaped by geological processes and human passage, retains a sense of narrative, embedding memory into its natural acoustics and visual contours. As night falls, the effects intensify. The road becomes a corridor of shadow and echo, with headlights cutting narrow bands of illumination across the asphalt. Figures pacing along the cliffs appear more distinct against the dark rock. Echoes of voices and footsteps carry farther, seeming to interact with the observer's own sounds. The combination of visual and auditory cues creates a rhythm, a sense of interaction between the visitor and the landscape, producing a narrative of presence, reflection, and memory. Despite the uncanny experiences, Echo Canyon Road remains physically safe. The phenomena are perceptual, subtle, and largely tied to the unique acoustics and topography of the canyon. Observers are not threatened, but they are compelled to navigate with heightened awareness and careful attention. The environment encourages mindfulness, drawing the observer into the interplay of sound, light, and shadow that defines the canyon's character. By morning, the canyon returns to relative normalcy. Shadows shorten with the rising sun, echoes are less pronounced, and figures vanish from view. Wind moves across the asphalt and stone without producing unusual sound. Travelers reflect on the previous night's experiences, carrying with them the memory of distorted voices, shadowy figures, and the acute perception of space and presence. The canyon remains unchanged, yet the impression of observation, layered sound, and ephemeral forms endures in memory. Echo Canyon Road persists as a place where landscape, perception, and history converge. Long stretches of narrow asphalt, towering cliffs, unnatural echoes, and fleeting figures create an environment that engages sight, hearing, and intuition. Travelers experience not only a physical passage but a space where sound and shadow interact, where presence and perception intertwine, and where the canyon communicates through subtle cues that endure long after the journey has ended. The road is both path and narrative, inviting those who traverse it to observe carefully, listen closely, and experience the interplay of natural grandeur and enduring mystery. Skeleton Mesa Road stretches through a rugged landscape of jagged cliffs and rocky ridges, where the sun-bleached stone takes on forms reminiscent of skeletal shapes. Erosion has carved bones and ribs into the mesas, casting long shadows across the sand and gravel below. The terrain is uneven and harsh, with narrow ledges and sudden drops that demand attention from anyone traveling along the winding path. During daylight, the road is stark and mesmerizing. Rocks jut upward in jagged formations, some resembling spines and skulls, others twisted into abstract shapes that evoke unease. As evening falls, the character of the mesa shifts. Shadows lengthen and blend, hiding the edges of cliffs and exaggerating the skeletal shapes in the rocks. The horizon glows faintly as the sun dips behind distant ridges, and the air becomes cooler, carrying the faint scent of dry earth and desert flora. The interplay of light and shadow creates a sense of movement where none exists, making the landscape feel unpredictable and alive. Travelers often feel watched. High cliffs overlook the road from every side, and the human mind is quick to attribute form and intent to the rugged shapes above. Visitors describe a sensation of awareness, the feeling that eyes trace their movement along the path even when no one is present. The effect is subtle but persistent, a combination of height, perspective, and the natural tendency to seek life in shapes and shadows. Figures sometimes appear perched on ridges. Silhouettes emerge at the edge of cliffs or atop mesas, standing or crouched as though observing the road below. They hold position for a brief moment, distinct against the sky, then vanish when approached. Observers report that the figures maintain human proportions, posture, and balance, yet leave no trace on the rock or earth. Their sudden disappearance reinforces the sense that the road and cliffs are part of a larger, unseen presence. The landscape amplifies perception. Wind carries subtle sounds across the mesas, loose stones shifting, dust scraping against rock, the faint rustle of desert brush. These natural noises echo unnaturally along cliffs and gullies, creating the impression of movement or presence where none is visible. Shadows stretch and bend across ridges, changing with each step and the angle of light, further enhancing the sensation of figures appearing and disappearing. Travelers report heightened awareness. Each step is measured, each glance deliberate. Amplified by the cliffs, reinforcing the feeling that the environment itself is attentive. Anticipating the sudden appearance of shadow or shape. A place where the past and present blend together. Minutes can stretch without awareness as attention focuses on cliffs and shadows. The perception of distance becomes unreliable, a ridge that appears nearby may be far away. While shapes seen on distant edges may seem close, the road itself feels longer than it is. And the mind senses patterns of presence and movement that are difficult to rationalize. The skeletal formations contribute to the effect. Ridges and spires jut upward in ways that mimic ribcages and skulls. When silhouetted against sunset or moonlight, they suggest life and intent. Travelers often interpret these forms as figures or guardians, a perception enhanced by natural movement of light and dust. The formations remain unchanged, yet they provoke recognition of human-like patterns, reinforcing the sense of observation. Even during the day, figures may be perceived. Shadows and light interact with the rock, creating intermittent impressions of movement. A form may appear crouched on a ridge, then vanish as the observer adjusts perspective. Dust and small stones tumble down slopes unpredictably, adding to the impression of presence. The cumulative effect produces a sense that the environment is aware and responsive. The road and mesas maintain an enduring presence in memory. Visitors recount not only the skeletal forms and cliffs, but the sensation of being watched, the fleeting figures, and the persistent echoes of footsteps and movement. The experience leaves a lasting impression of a landscape alive with subtle activity, where perception, terrain, and natural forces converge to produce moments of unease and fascination. To produce moments of unease and fascination. Skeleton Mesa Road continues to challenge and captivate. Its jagged ridges, skeletal rock formations, and shifting shadows create a space where human perception interacts with landscape in unusual ways. Figures appear and vanish, shadows stretch and bend, and the road feels observed as it stretches through the desert. Travelers leave the path with a sense of awe and vigilance, carrying the memory of cliffs that watch, ridges that conceal, and a landscape that exists simultaneously as inert stone and living presence. A place where the extraordinary emerges quietly from the bones of the earth. Desert Phantom Trail stretches across barren terrain, a straight ribbon of asphalt cutting through sand, rock, and sparse vegetation. The horizon is vast, empty except for distant mesas and low hills. The air is dry, carrying the subtle scent of dust, stone, and distant shrubs. The sun beats down relentlessly during the day, casting harsh shadows across the road, but at night the desert transforms into an expanse of darkness and muted shapes. Travelers notice the isolation immediately. Long stretches of road leave nothing for the eye to grasp, creating a sense of both freedom and exposure. The mind begins to focus on subtle changes in light, shadow, and sound. A shift in wind, a flicker along the asphalt, or a movement in the periphery can feel significant. The environment encourages heightened attention, each mile drawing the observer into the rhythm of the desert. Glowing orbs are among the most frequently reported phenomena. They appear above the asphalt, small at first, like distant lanterns suspended in air. The orbs move slowly, deliberately, sometimes hovering in place before drifting along the path. Observers describe them as luminous and soft in tone, casting a gentle light on the road beneath. Their movement often feels responsive, shifting in coordination with the vehicle or the gaze of the traveler, as if the lights are observing rather than simply existing. The orbs are unpredictable. Sometimes they appear singly. Sometimes in pairs or clusters. They may vanish suddenly or fade gradually into the night sky. Drivers approaching the points directly often find the lights no longer aligned with the road or horizon. The sense is fleeting, leaving a lasting impression of attention and awareness rather than tangible threat. Sound accompanies the visual phenomena. Travelers report faint whispers carried by the wind. These are often indistinct at first, mere syllables or fragments of words. Yet with time, they can form coherent phrases, warnings, or cautions that appear directed at the observer. The voices are subtle, never loud, blending with natural sounds of wind sweeping across the asphalt or the distant shifting of sand. Attempting to locate the source usually reveals nothing. The whispers seem to travel with the traveler, appearing in front, beside, or behind, always elusive and ethereal. The trail's environment enhances perception. Air is dry and still in some stretches, allowing sound to carry unnaturally. The flat, open terrain allows visibility across long distances, yet the darkness of night and uneven terrain create illusions of depth and motion. Shadows stretch across asphalt or sand, altering the sense of space. Small movements, like distant wind-driven debris, can appear coordinated, reinforcing the impression of intentionality. Travelers often feel changes in temperature. The desert night is cool. Yet sudden gusts of cold air sweep across vehicles or pedestrians. These shifts are brief but noticeable, intensifying attention and the sense of presence. The combination of orbs, whispers, and temperature changes creates an immersive environment, where perception is heightened and ordinary landscape features are experienced as extraordinary. Historical accounts lend context. Desert Phantom Trail has been used for decades as a passage between isolated settlements, supply routes, and exploration paths. Reports of lost travelers, disoriented drivers, and unexplained lights have persisted through generations. Local lore describes spirits or guardians of the desert who move silently, observing those who pass. The phenomenon of orbs and whispers may echo collective memory, reinforced by the natural acoustics and open space of the desert. Natural explanations account for some experiences. Heat gradients and air currents can create shimmering lights above asphalt at night. Wind can carry and distort sound, producing the effect of whispered words. Human perception in low-light conditions, especially across long empty stretches, naturally interprets ambiguous stimuli as motion or presence. Still, the consistency of reports, the coordination of the lights, and the layering of auditory and visual phenomena exceed what is easily explained by natural causes alone. Evening travel heightens all sensations. As darkness deepens, shadows blend across desert surfaces, reducing contrast and making movement difficult to gauge. The orbs appear brighter and more defined against the night sky. Whispers become more distinct, traveling across wind channels formed by terrain. Drivers and walkers alike report an acute awareness of surroundings, a sense of being watched or guided by unseen forces. The effect is immersive, commanding attention without threatening. Observers often experience lingering impressions after leaving the trail. The sensation of orbs moving above the road, whispers carried by wind, and brief gusts of cool air persist in memory. Travelers describe heightened awareness of sound, shadow, and space even after re-entering populated areas. The trail leaves an imprint on perception, blending environment, memory, and history into a compelling experience. Desert Phantom Trail remains accessible, offering remote driving, exploration, and scenic views. By day, it provides a stark and dramatic landscape, revealing asphalt cutting through desert, rock formations, and long horizons. By night, or under shifting environmental conditions, it becomes an environment of layered perception. Orbs, whispers, and subtle temperature changes create an experience that engages multiple senses. Visitors are reminded that landscapes are not merely physical, they shape perception, memory, and awareness, producing moments that endure long after the journey has ended. The road, desert, and night sky converge to create a space both beautiful and enigmatic. Glowing orbs drift, whispers follow, and sudden gusts stir awareness. Travelers along Desert Phantom Trail encounter a landscape that interacts with attention and perception, preserving history, mystery, and the subtle interplay of natural and unexplained phenomena. It is a path where observation itself becomes part of the journey, leaving each visitor with a lasting impression of the desert's quiet, luminous presence. Midnight wash road winds across arid terrain where dry riverbeds cut channels through sand and gravel. The moon casts pale light on the washes, illuminating the cracked riverbed and scattered stones. By day, the route appears empty and ordinary, a series of natural corridors between low ridges and scrub. At night, however, the landscape transforms. Shadows stretch unnaturally, and the wash itself seems to pulse with presence. As if the land remembers every traveler who has passed before. Vehicles move cautiously along the road. Tires crunch over gravel, engines hum, and headlights illuminate stretches of empty wash. The route narrows at points where walls of sand rise, forcing slow navigation. Each step forward is measured, as drivers and passengers are aware that the open desert around them carries both isolation and unpredictability. Figures sometimes appear walking along the washes. Shadows take shape in peripheral vision, humanoid but indistinct, moving slowly across the dry riverbed. Observers describe them as gliding or walking with deliberate pace, appearing near bends or in shallow hollows. When attention focuses on the figures, they vanish, leaving only empty sand and the distant glimmer of moonlight on stone. Footsteps echo behind vehicles. Soft, irregular thuds match the rhythm of tires or steps, following closely along the wash. Drivers often glance in mirrors or pause to look behind, expecting someone to emerge, yet the path remains empty. The echoes linger briefly and then fade, returning unpredictably further down the road. The dry riverbeds amplify perception. Shallow depressions and smooth sand carry sound, making ordinary noises seem closer, sharper, and more intentional. Pebbles shift under tires or wind, adding to the impression of movement beyond immediate observation. Shadows cast by ridges distort shapes, producing the fleeting impression of forms that vanish when approached. The dry riverbeds amplify perception. Shallow depressions and smooth sand carry sound, making ordinary noises seem closer, sharper, and more intentional. Pebbles shift under tires or wind, adding to the impression of movement beyond immediate observation. Shadows cast by ridges distort shapes, producing the fleeting impression of forms that vanish when approached. Midnight Wash Road has been traveled for generations. A path for settlers, traders, and locals navigating desert terrain. Vehicles or travelers lost to sudden flash floods or isolation left subtle marks across the sand and memory. Stories of travelers encountering shadows or strange movement have persisted, giving the washes a reputation for caution and awareness. The figures are consistent across reports. Observers describe pale shapes, moving silently along the washes. Their pace is deliberate, never threatening, and their presence seems aligned with cautionary instinct. Some drivers report seeing the same figure reappear as they progress along the road, maintaining distance yet mirroring their motion. Night heightens the phenomenon. Shadows deepen, ridges flatten in low light, and the dry riverbed becomes a corridor of shifting perception. Figures are easier to glimpse at the edge of headlights or moonlight. Footsteps echo more clearly, and the dry sand seems to carry sound unusually well. Observers report heightened awareness, as if the landscape is both empty and attentive. Wind and air movement contribute. Gentle gusts carry subtle noises across the washes, shifting pebbles and dust, creating the impression of movement where none is visible. The sound of tires against gravel blends with these elements, producing layers of auditory cues that enhance the sensation of unseen presence. Travelers report physiological responses. Heart rates increase slightly, attention sharpens, and muscles tense instinctively. The combination of sight, sound, and isolation creates heightened awareness, compelling careful navigation and observation. Drivers describe instinctively slowing down or scanning more thoroughly, guided by subconscious recognition of the unusual. Time and space feel altered along the washes. Distances appear inconsistent, the horizon seems closer or further than it is. And shadows distort scale. Observers report that figures may appear to move unpredictably, vanishing and reappearing, creating the impression of continuity despite absence. The phenomenon preserves memory of past movement. Shapes, echoes, and figures may reflect those who traveled before, lingering in both the terrain and perception. The dry riverbeds carry history in stone, sand, and impression, guiding attention and behavior along the path without any visible cause. Dawn restores ordinary perception. Moonlight fades, shadows retreat, and figures vanish completely. Footsteps cease, leaving only the sound of tires on gravel. The landscape appears unchanged, calm, and empty. Yet observers carry a vivid impression of unseen movement and presence. Midnight Wash Road endures. Dry riverbeds continue to cut the landscape. Figures appear and vanish, footsteps echo behind vehicles, and whispers drift along the path in subtle, fleeting patterns. Travelers leave aware of both the danger and mystery inherent in the washes. A reminder that even open desert holds memory, presence, and phenomena beyond immediate comprehension. Visitors depart carrying impressions. They recall fleeting shapes along the sand, footsteps following without source, and the sense of attentive presence along the wash. Midnight Wash Road. A place of perception and memory. A landscape where desert, shadow, and subtle phenomena converge, to create an experience that lingers long after the tires have left the gravel behind. Final Horizon Road stretches across open terrain, far from towns and well-traveled highways. The pavement winds between rolling hills and sparse forests, disappearing into distant ridges that mark the horizon. During daylight, the landscape is wide and expansive, painted with muted earth tones and softened by the haze of distance. Travelers can see for miles, with occasional signs of wildlife moving along the edges of the road. The openness invites reflection, yet it carries an undercurrent of isolation that becomes more pronounced as daylight fades. The road is the most remote stretch of all, far removed from emergency services or human activity. There are no streetlights, few guardrails, and only the occasional weathered sign to mark turns or inclines. The terrain is uneven, with dips and rises that obscure the view of the road ahead. These physical characteristics contribute to a heightened sense of attention, as drivers and hikers alike adjust to the demands of isolation and distance. As the sun begins to set, the atmosphere transforms. Shadows stretch long across the pavement, blending with natural undulations in the landscape. The air becomes cooler and heavier, carrying the scent of dry earth and sparse vegetation. Travelers often report a sudden, inexplicable heaviness, a sensation that presses against the chest and back. Yet it demands awareness and caution, producing an intuitive sense that the road itself is imposing presence upon those who traverse it. At the horizon, travelers may see figures. They stand motionless, distant shapes that appear humanoid yet impossibly still. The first sighting is often fleeting, a shadow among shadows, almost indistinguishable from the terrain. Observers describe the figures as being aligned with the horizon, facing the road or gazing outward. Their positions remain constant, unmoving despite the approach of vehicles or movement along the road. The figures fade only when the first rays of sunlight touch the landscape. During pre-dawn or twilight, they can appear more pronounced, sometimes casting shadows that suggest volume, depth, or movement. Yet close observation reveals nothing tangible. They vanish without sound, leaving the horizon empty, yet the impression of their presence lingers. Multiple travelers report seeing similar shapes on different nights, always positioned along the farthest visible edge of the road, reinforcing the sense of continuity and mystery. The road amplifies perception. Its remoteness heightens attention. Every curve and rise creating shifting lines of sight. Shadows appear deeper, and small movements in the distance attract notice. And the awareness of the figures and the immensity of the surrounding terrain. Travelers report a combination of fascination and caution, an interplay of curiosity and instinct that guides each step or mile. Sound along the road behaves unusually. The wind carries faint echoes of movement across hills, producing noises that seem close but cannot be traced. Vehicles on the road sound louder, each engine hum resonating off distant ridges. Travelers describe an acute sensitivity to auditory input, where every subtle variation is noted and interpreted. The combination of sound, shadow, and distance creates a fully immersive environment that engages multiple senses simultaneously. The landscape itself contributes to perception. Rolling hills obscure distance, causing shapes at the horizon to appear closer or farther depending on incline and curvature. Variations in color, light, and texture produce visual effects that suggest form where none exists. Even ordinary terrain, like patches of vegetation or distant rocks, can be interpreted as humanoid shapes, reinforcing the impression of watchers at the horizon. Travelers describe a rhythm to movement along final horizon road. Dips and rises reveal and conceal portions of the road. Figures at the horizon appear and disappear with shifting perspective. Shadows stretch and contract as light changes. The experience encourages deliberate navigation, heightened attention, and a focus on both immediate surroundings and distant visual cues. The interplay of environmental features and perception creates a narrative in which the road itself shapes awareness. Historical context informs understanding. This stretch of road has long been isolated, previously used as a transit route. Few records indicate consistent human presence, and past travelers note the difficulty of navigating its remoteness. The combination of geography, limited visibility, and lack of nearby habitation contributes to experiences that feel heightened, mysterious, and persistent across multiple observers. Even as night deepens, the road maintains its influence. The horizon remains visible yet obscured by darkness, figures appear, and the sensation of dread persists. Travelers report heightened intuition, noticing subtle cues in light, terrain, and sound that would otherwise go unobserved. Every element of the environment contributes to the overall experience, creating an immersive blend of visual, auditory, and psychological effects. Creating an immersive blend of visual, auditory, and psychological effects. By dawn, the road returns to ordinary perception. Shadows shrink, the horizon brightens, and figures vanish with the rising sun. Shadows shrink, the horizon brightens, and figures vanish with the rising sun. The pavement appears empty, the landscape serene. The memory of presence, the sensation of heaviness, and the impression of figures standing at the horizon remain vivid. Travelers leave with a heightened awareness of distance, light, and perception, carrying the experience beyond the road itself. Travelers leave with a heightened awareness of distance, light, and perception, carrying the experience beyond the road itself. Final Horizon Road endures as the most remote stretch in the region. A location where geography, light, and perception combine to create a powerful sense of isolation and awareness. The road teaches attention to detail, caution in navigation, and respect for the subtle interplay of environment and human perception. Figures at the horizon, shadows, and the weight of presence create an unforgettable experience, leaving every traveler mindful of both the vastness of the landscape and the mysteries that persist at the edge of sight. Thank you for traveling the haunted desert border roads of Arizona with me tonight. These roads stretch across an unforgiving landscape, carrying with them the memories of those who were lost, forgotten, or never seen again. Some travelers leave unscathed. Some leave with stories that they cannot explain. And some say the desert follows them in their dreams, shadows and whispers keeping pace with their every step. If you ever find yourself alone on a desert border road after dark, slow your pace, listen to the wind, and watch the horizon. Would you dare drive alone along one of these haunted roads at midnight? Or would you turn back before the shadows reach your vehicle? Rest well, my friend. Until our next haunted journey.